You're listening to Truth Hurts podcast, presented by myself, Mark Sheppard, and special guests. Hello and welcome to our very first Truth Hurts podcast. My name is Mark Sheppard, your host, and this episode is going to be in two parts based on family law. Today we are joined by Steve, the author of blog Dad's Still Fighting for You, Emily, and the organizer of Ambling Against Alienation. We're also joined by Debi, the emotional resilience coach, alienated parent and grandparent. We also have Matt, an ex-registered nurse of 40 years. And we also have Paul, the CEO of West Africa Energy, chair of the board of trustees for Families Need Fathers and Both Parents Matter. We'll be having an open discussion today with regards to family law and the court professionals. We've got a few topics to cover today, which just give people a bit of an enlightenment of what we're going to be talking about. And it's going to be family court and judges, CAFCAS, social services, children's guardians and legal aid. I'm going to kick this off because obviously these topics are close to my heart. So I'm going to start off with the family court and judges. So the most important thing is when people are in relationships or about to separate or whatever, divorce, whatever happens in that relationship, sometimes you're going to get put into a situation where you may not gain access to your children. Now, we all know that as parental alienation, but when it comes to the courts, there's a process that you need to follow. At the moment, it's compulsory for whatever parent it is that maybe doesn't have access to the children, has to go to mediation first before applying to the family court. Now, myself, when I started this journey 11, 12 years ago for my eldest daughter, the process was very different then. I didn't actually have to go to mediation. I could actually just apply directly to the courts. And that's what I did. It's only when we started going through the court process, they said, why have you tried mediation? So they said, before you come back, why don't you go away and try mediation? Now, the hardest thing with mediation is to get the other parent to cooperate, to actually engage with the mediation, which I struggled with, unfortunately. Even though I did it, the other party caused problems and wouldn't really cooperate when it came to the actual mediation sessions. So in the end, we had to go to court. So I filed my C100 application and the whole process started. Now, this is something I'd never done before. I never felt very comfortable doing it because I didn't understand why I needed to do it. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are listening to this podcast thinking, I'm the same. You know, everything was perfectly fine when we were together. And then we separated and all of a sudden I have to go to court to see my children. You know, it's rather ridiculous. So for me, when the whole process started, I felt that, you know, it's really unnecessary. So I tried to get it wrapped up as quick as possible. But I found that when I was in court, that, and I'm gonna be quite blunt about this, the judges I had, not saying everyone's gonna have the same experience, but the judge that I had for my particular case seemed very biased. They wasn't really engaging with me in the court. And I was very grieved about this. Because at the end of the day, one, I'm going to court in the first place, which I didn't really want to do in the first place. But I had to go to court to see my children. And I was in court, and the judge, I felt, was very biased. They wasn't engaging with me. They didn't want to view my evidence. They didn't want to support me in any way. Now, this is the issue that I have. When you have to be thrown into a situation where you have to go to court, it's distressing enough. It takes its toll on your mental health. It makes you anxious. Why is it that when you're in there, they make you feel like, and I'm going to be honest, it made me feel like a criminal. They made me feel like a criminal. They made me feel like I'd done something wrong as to why I ended up in court in the first place. Now, I don't know everyone's personal experiences here, but does anyone else have a view on that? How did you lot, if anyone here ended up in court, how did you feel when you entered that court or applied to court?
Yeah, hi Mark. So this is Paul O'Callaghan. I felt exactly the same. You know, I'd never had any experience whatsoever of the court process before family law. I'd never been into a court, never even had so much as a parking ticket or whatever. But the moment you start going into this process, even walking into the building, you know, you get heart palpitations, you start wondering what's going on, and it's the lack of certainty around the whole process which, you know, gives you that anxiety. And I think, you know, the idea that you go in there, you see your ex-partner, ex-wife, ex-husband or boyfriend sat there in the same room, you're not talking to each other, you have your lawyer, they have their lawyer, and it's almost as if you're two boxers gearing up for a fight. And it's really a very, very unpleasant experience, and you're made to feel like a criminal. I'm sure it's designed deliberately to make you feel unwanted in that court process, and it's a very difficult experience to explain to people who have no knowledge of the process. So I share your views completely with it.
So the biggest problem that I felt is when you go to court, you don't actually get any support. So you're kind of on your own, whether or not you choose to self-represent or you choose to get a lawyer in to support you. Now, let's be honest. If you get a solicitor or a barrister to support you when you're going through this process, you will find that the process will get dragged out. Now, I don't know anyone that hasn't got a solicitor or a barrister involved that hasn't had their case dragged out for quite a long time, actually. Whereas you can normally wrap this stuff up within 3 to 6 months. But like myself, I was in there a good solid 3 to 4 years for my children. And to me, that is too long. You shouldn't have to be in court that amount of time. And as you said, Paul, when you first go in, you're anxious, you're scared, you're worried about the future. And the last thing you need is to speak to a judge and plead your case to tell them why you want to be a parent. Yeah. It's absurd.
And I think it's also important to don't forget this often comes at the most unsettling time in your life. You're going through a separation of someone that you've been married to for a number of years. You know, chances are during that separation you're going to have to move house. One of you will have to move house. The children will have to move house and so on. So you're you know, I think they say marriage, you know, moving house, divorce are the most stressful things you can go through. All of a sudden you're going through at least 3 or 4 of them all at the same time. So your emotional level is literally at capacity, and you're then faced in front of a judge, and you've got to say, I am a good parent because of X, Y, and Z. You know, and many people have been, you know, let's say 5 years married, they've had 2 children or whatever, and all of a sudden contact is withdrawn, and all of a sudden you're in front of somebody begging to see your children. Was actually 2 months ago it wasn't a problem, and you were seeing your kids no problem. And so it's the whole thing is it's a very irrational and unsettling and unexpected process to be in at probably what is the worst time in your life as you're going through. But there's no support whatsoever for anyone to go through it.
I was going to say, actually, what you're talking about there, Paul, is you're talking about mass layers of grief that you're actually experiencing. Because it's grief at the breakdown of the relationship, grief at the loss of your children, grief at the loss of your home, grief for so many different things. But we don't give it.
And that's exactly how it feels. It does feel like grief. It really does.
Well, that's exactly
it does. I
what
agree,
it
100%.
Is. That's exactly what it is. And if you're angry as well, that is also a form of grief. So all of those levels of grief that you're carrying around, it's incredibly painful baggage, and it's just not acknowledged in the court system. You're seen, if you're angry, as being angry. You're not seen as grieving. But that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
And if you're seen as being angry, you're seen as being the bad parent as well.
Yes.
Exactly. If you show emotion, they seem to use that against you. Like you're irrational, you know.
Yeah.
Why are you behaving like this? But then you think to yourself, well, hold on. Before I ended up in court, I had a perfectly fine relationship with my children.
Yeah.
There was no issue there. But yet, as soon as I'm separated or divorced, now I'm sitting in front of you, judge. You know, why am I here? There was no issues before, but all of a sudden now it's an issue, and I have to come to you for you to tell me when I can see my children.
I think, Mark, you've just hit the nail on the head with my overriding motion of it all. It was just total confusion. Why am I here? What's gone wrong? How the hell did this happen? How am I going to go forward? Just total confusion and no support, as you said earlier. There's no, even your own solicitor or my own solicitor, I didn't really get any support from them.
And
they're not really interested in supporting you, though, are they? Let's be honest.
No.
They don't actually know how.
Exactly.
They don't know how. Many years ago, I did actually work in family law. I was the receptionist in the front of house, and the litigation guy was always very abrupt, very curt. He didn't really know how. They're not taught how. They're not taught how to really relate to you.
But that's our biggest problem, as we sort of try and fight this parental alienation. What have we been going 5 minutes, and there's already so many emotions, or so many different types of emotion that's come up. It's such a massive subject. Various people having so many different views on it. It's yeah.
I think also the underlying issue here is the power that's given to these circuit judges that don't really understand. They don't understand, one, how each parent needs to be supported, and they don't understand really what you're trying to achieve as a parent, because as far as they're concerned, everything's black and white. They need to write a court order, and they're going to say, right, you used to see your children 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but now I'm going to give you 2 hours.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what you're saying, but I think part of the challenge is that, and I'm going to say fathers, because it's typically fathers who make the applications for contact. A man, I believe, and I'm not a psychologist or anything like that, but I believe a man typically wants to fix something, and before the process has gone through, he already has an answer in his head. Okay, this is what I want. It's going to be, I want to see my kids, I want to see them midweek, I want to see them at the weekends, and take them away on holiday and all that stuff. And what we don't understand is actually there's a whole process that has to be got through. Whether you agree with the process or don't, I don't agree with the process, but they are trained, the lawyers, the judges, and all the ancillary services are trained to go through this process. They're not trained to get to an answer. They're trained, okay, you've got to do step 1, then you go to step 2, then you go to step 3, then you go to step 4, and you do all that way until these people come to some sort of agreement. And it's just unbearable. It's absolutely unbearable. And when I was there, when I first went into court, I was in court 2 times. One back in 2006, and it's 2007, and again in about 2017. And I saw a distinct change between the court in those 10 years, in that they had got much worse, and I mean much worse.
100%.
And you just don't recognise what you're up against, and so on. And the other challenge is, you make your application to court, you say, okay, now the court will decide, and you expect that to be the answer, and it's not the answer. They don't care about your case. They have thousands of cases. They're going to churn you through as quickly as they can. I've been in court at least 70 times, and probably seen, I would guess, about 40 different judges.
Oh wow!
And how on earth can you look? How on earth can anyone have any serious view on a case after all of that? So
it's consistency, isn't it? It's there's no consistency. Now, when both times I went to court, and I went to court a lot of times, but the 2 judges, the 2 separate cases that I went to court for, not one judge ever looked at my evidence. Okay. And I questioned that. I actually challenged them, and I said, "Why are you not looking?" I said, "The whole purpose of a court is the balance of probabilities, to actually look at the evidence and make a judgment based on the evidence that's produced by either client." Okay, but when I produced my evidence, now don't get me wrong, there was a lot of evidence. Okay, but when you're a parent that is non-resident, all you want to do is see your children. That's all you want to do. You if that means you have to pull up every bit of evidence since the day you was born, you will do that. You will do that because at the end of the day, all you want to do is see your children. So I want to talk about the judges now. How the judges work in terms of coming to their decisions. Okay, and especially for me, if you don't read the evidence or prepare to read the evidence, then how can you make a judgment that is in the best interest of those children?
No, I completely agree.
Yeah.
They've
Clearly can't, because my case was it went over quite a few years, and I had 5 enforcement orders, and I got to see the children again. She let me see them after that, but then she moved 100 miles away and didn't tell me. She'd met some guy and married him and moved away. She told me she's moving locally. Then I managed to find out where she'd moved to. So then I took it back to court again, and then she started to. It was a bit weird how this went. She would let me see the children sporadically, and so I was seeing them for a while. But it was on her terms. I had to go to her house, and it was all on her terms. And it just got worse from there. And then she got involved with an alcoholic, and she became an alcoholic, and then it just got really bad. And basically. The social services got involved because she went to the school, because I couldn't go to the school. I couldn't report it to social services because that would be seen as a malicious act. So I couldn't say the guy she's with now is alcoholic and she's got a big problem herself. I couldn't say that. So I had to wait for some other person to do it. Someone at the school actually reported it to social services. The children were put on a child in need plan, and then it became a child protection plan. In the meantime, she'd made, I can't remember how many ridiculous amounts of false allegations against me, which got even worse when I refused to pay her maintenance because she was drinking all the money away. And I said I'd get the children the food delivered. And she stopped me seeing them at that point. And then next thing I know, a month later, I'm getting accused of child sexual abuse. So I thought that was relevant. And I had to go to the child protection meetings. They increased the threshold from child in need to child protection at that point. And all these females in this room were looking at me like I was just the biggest piece of scum you've ever seen in your life. And they wouldn't engage with me. It was just horrible. But finally, when I went back to court again, they said I couldn't get the boyfriend. They couldn't get rid of because she had to tell him to go. They had no powers, the social services, to ask him to leave. So in the meantime, I'd gone back to court, and I'd had a recording of her. Basically, I used the recording to the court on a parenting principle, where she was saying to my daughter, "You hate women, so see your next G's done." That's well known to my daughter's trial. And then they agreed to reduce that, and then she started to shake, and she admitted to it there and then. And she said it's because she was an alcoholic. Anyway, that went on from there. But it kind of got different for me then, because they now saw her in a different light, and then they pulled in a children's solicitor for the children, and a guardian, and then they wanted psychological interviews of all of us. So they did me and her, and they did the children first, then me and her, and then they found out the children were unjustifiably rejecting me through the most sort of anemic of reasons you can imagine. That they really didn't stand up to anything. Like, I nearly took them into a field full of balls once or something, and my son was upset because he had to wait his turn to wear 3D glasses to watch a movie, that kind of thing. And then they decided, then it all changed from that point, and it became quite different. Your experiences, which are horrible, which I've just heard, mine kind of turned around then, and they decided that they get an HHJ in, which is a senior judge. He also tries criminal trials and stuff like that. And she was great, and then the guardian was great, and she suggested parental alienation is occurring, and she's the one that pushed for the psychological processes and everything else. And then she was asking me, how do you feel about having your children full time? And I was thinking, oh my God, this is great, you know. And then that all fell apart when she suddenly went sick and disappeared. Then they got another guardian in, this man. He was okay, but he wasn't asking for, talking about me having the children. They just wanted to keep the children first, so they got somebody into her house to dry her out. She got rid of the boyfriend because he beat her up in front of my daughter and threatened to burn father for a pet salon. In the meantime, I can't see the kids because of all these false allegations, which was since LFA'd and completely forgotten about. But that damaged my relationship with the children, and I didn't see them for 3 years. By that time, she'd properly alienated them. And the last hearing in February was they were saying one of it was my fault. It's tragic. The children are too old to come and move in with me. Because of their ages and their resistance. So they decided to leave them where they were. And the judge even said himself the children were going to suffer further emotional harm. Well, this could have all been cleared up a lot sooner.
That's what I was going to say,
I
actually.
had exactly the same thing.
That is exactly what I was going to say. It's the dragging out process. I don't understand it. I don't get it, because if you look at it realistically, if any judge looked at everyone's case and just said, right, I'm going to look at the evidence. Right, there's no official reports from the police of abuse or anything like that, or any harm to the children. Okay, so what we can do is the other parent can start seeing the child or children while we're going through the court process. Okay, but what they do, they stop everything. They stop all contact. But that's what I'm saying. You put that silver bullet in there,
sexual allegation, they said,
and that's it. You can stop all communication.
Yeah.
Do you not notice though that there's a pattern that comes in these cases? Is that once the resident parent feels like the case is going against them, the level of allegations gets ratcheted up.
Correct.
Exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing happened in mine. Is that we all started, things were moving my way. All of a sudden, an allegation of sexual. I was inappropriately being sexual to my daughter and all this type of stuff. That all of a sudden, panic measures struck. I mean, my ex-wife actually wrote on my daughter. My daughter was like 9 months old, 10 months old. She wrote on her nappy, "Don't hurt me." Actually on her nappy. So when she came to me for contact, I was changing my daughter's nappy, and that was the first thing I saw. I had a guardian. I called the guardian and said, my ex-wife is not mentally stable enough to be looking after a child as a result of this. I said, oh no, it's okay. That she feels that's exasperated by the whole process and so on. So they're constantly making excuses for them. And then these allegations just get worse and worse and worse. And then status quo sets in, and all of a sudden it's all this, that, and the other. So it's a real challenge. I just want to point out though that the guardians, the court, and CAFCAS have a legal obligation in public law cases to maintain the relationship between the child and the parent. So if a child is going up for adoption or anything like that, until the court orders the adoption, they have a legal obligation to maintain that relationship. Whereas they don't identify that legal obligation inside private law as well. So they just say, okay, the father or the mother is not seeing their child, and therefore don't worry about it. In 2 years, maybe 3 years' time, when it's all resolved, we might be able to get back to contact again. And then the case is closed, and no one is there to help you. No one is there to aid you through this whole process.
But this is the thing, because remember, when you go to court, the first thing you do when you've put in your application is you're thinking, I'm going to go to court and they're going to give me some form of justice to see my children.
Yeah.
And in the back of your mind, you're always told the same thing by the guardians, the solicitors, everyone saying, well, the court's going to work for the best interest of that child.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. And you'll always hear that. And if you're listening to this podcast, that's a phrase, unfortunately, they throw around quite a lot, especially when they go against you. They will continue to say that we're working in the best interest of that child. Okay. Now, when you go to court, they assign you. I'm going to move on to our lovely CAFCAS. I don't know how many people here have had experience with CAFCAS.
Oh yes.
But I have had some horrendous experience with them. Now, don't get me wrong. They're probably not all the same. Unfortunately, the ones that I had were all the same, unfortunately. And what really bugged me about it was the lack of research they done with me in terms of me spending time with my children, because they never ever actually did an interview with me and my children. All the interviews I had with CAFCAS was either via the phone, or if they did meet me in person, it was always me on my own. They can never see the interaction between me and my child. But yet, when I spoke to them about my ex-partner, it was always, yeah, we've been to the house, you know, we've seen how that your daughter is interacting with the mother, and it's great, and the stepfather is doing great with your daughter, and all that stuff. And I'm thinking, well, hold on, you've taken the time to go and visit them, but you haven't taken the time to come and visit me with my child. Yeah. So how would you know what kind of bond I have with my child if you've never seen it?
No, I completely agree. Yeah,
you know, how can you make a judgment, or how can you do a report on me if you've never seen me with my child? So the other issue that I have with Kafkas is the fact that nothing's recorded. Okay, nothing is recorded. No phone calls, no in-person interviews. They're not recorded. Okay, and I have a big issue with that, and I'll tell you why. In my personal case, when I actually sat down with the Kafkas officer, they actually said to me, you know, your ex-partner this, your ex-partner, and I'm thinking, okay, so you can see what I see then. Great, fantastic. Okay, so that means that your report is going to show everything that I said from the start in my position statements and everything. It's all going to come out in a report. Fantastic. I was so happy. I was like, that's it. This is it. Game over. Let's just move on now. Let's just get access to my child and move on. That didn't happen, did it?
No.
When they submitted that Section 7, okay, I felt sick. I felt physically sick. Now, as I said, this podcast is not to scare you, okay? If you're listening to this podcast, you're thinking, oh, this all sounds like horror stories. It's not. It's not. This is just our own personal experiences. Not every case will be dealt with the same. And, you know, it is potluck, unfortunately, who you get to work with when it comes to Kafkas and the type of judge that you might also receive. Now, a Section 7 report is supposed to be a report about you, your ex-partner, your children. It's supposed to encompass everything about your lifestyles and how beneficial it is to maintain that relationship with the children. Okay? Now, even though I had a glowing interview with Kafkas, unfortunately, the report said differently. The report said everything completely opposite to what I was discussing with Kafkas in the office, and that made me really angry. I'm not going to lie, it made me furious because I couldn't believe it. Felt like they were just sitting there lying to me, and I'd rather you be upfront with me and tell me the truth than to lie at me and then put it into a report. I was devastated. I'm not going to lie, I was devastated. So
it's like they're smiling at you and stabbing you.
Correct, at the same time, 100%, and that is not what a service should be about.
I'm going to speak up for Kafkas here a little bit. I mean, I've actually, apart from the last guardian, I had a total of 3 guardians with my daughter. Apart from the last guardian, every interaction I had with Kafkas was a positive one.
Oh,
and
wow.
Wow.
The Section 7 reports reflected the situation. You know, there were some things in there which I didn't agree with, but there were some things in there I agreed with. You know, you do need to understand it's a third person interpreting the conversation. So I've always had I've had positive experiences with Kafkas. The Last Guardian, however, echoes exactly what you said. Absolutely exactly what you said. And it got to the point, the Guardian herself, in a 2.5-year case, 4 times asked to be taken off the case. And each time the judge said, no, I don't want you to, I want you to stay on here. In the end, it got to the lawyer for the Guardian was writing the Kafkas reports. And I said to the judge, this is what's happening. And they denied it. I then put a subject access request into Kafkas, only to find an email from the lawyer to the Guardian saying, I've submitted this report, I'm sure you'll agree with it. And so the Guardian was just lazy, absolutely lazy. And it cost me easily 2 years of my life because of that, and ended up being alienated from my daughter as a result of it. She was awful. The only thing that me and my ex-wife agreed on is that the Guardian was useless in court.
That's a start. That's a start, because I
said she was useless.
I couldn't agree on anything,
Yeah.
And this is the thing. This is why I say to people, it's so important that we have services out there that actually support people, because going through this is traumatic. And Debi will agree with this. It can be such a traumatic experience. The baggage that you carry around with you while you're going through this process is horrendous. And as I said, these services don't actually support you. They make it sound like they're supporting you, They literally, when they're talking to you, they're like, oh yeah, we're there for you. We'll make sure we do what's best for the child. And da-da-da-da-da. But in hindsight, you're still sitting in court a year or two later going through the same motion.
Well, the one thing I didn't understand about the whole process is if you are a safe parent and the fact that you need to make an application to court to see your child proves that there is something wrong. So there was no credibility given for that. Actually, the fact I'm coming to court means there's something wrong on the other side. That means I'm stopped from seeing my child.
Yes, absolutely.
So,
and what Mark was
Debbie,
talking
sorry.
about the baggage that everybody carries, most of that baggage actually isn't seen. The
Correct.
people that I talk to that are going through these cases on a regular basis, parents and grandparents, whatever happens in that conversation never seems to actually make it to court. And that seems to me quite a backward way of dealing with something. If you as the parent or the grandparent is going to court because you have a problem and you need help to get it resolved,
Yeah.
why are they not actually hearing the things that you're saying?
I think Matt was dead right. Once you've made the court application, they see you as the problem.
Yes, yes, exactly that. And I hear that constantly, and a lot of my dealings are with grandparents. And when they say, oh, they were lovely to our face, but when we get to the court, they never even mention what we talked about. And then you wonder, what was all that effort for? What was all the time for and energy that you put into that, trying to have your voice heard, your fears heard, and being completely flattened by officialdom?
Yeah.
If I could just chip in, my experience with Kafkas was pretty much almost the opposite what you experienced, Mark, what you described. I did go to court and get contact. That was sorted quite easily. It was never adhered to, but that's another story. But Kafkas was instructed to investigate, and they did. They spoke to me on numerous occasions. They spoke to me with my new partner on numerous occasions. They spoke to me with the children on numerous occasions, children on their own as well. Did they speak to my ex-partner? No, not once. In fact, they inquired to me why she wasn't answering the phone, why she was not getting in contact with them. The report went to the court, and they admitted there was something wrong. They couldn't put their finger on it, but there was something wrong. That was the end of it. My allegations of emotional abuse were thrown out. She was allowed to continue as she'd been going on, poisoning me for the children. Sorry, my headphones have just dropped out.
Oh wow! I have never genuinely. I that is amazing. The fact that they actually took the time to do all that. It's very rare.
Not with my ex though. Not with the person that they needed to speak to.
It's very rare that they don't speak to someone. That's what I'm saying. Like your ex would probably. That's normally the first person that they speak to, and the fact that they didn't is well. That says it all, really.
The other annoying thing that I will never forgive the guy. He kept saying to me, "I have much more important cases to investigate than this."
Yes.
But
Thank you very much, Sunshine.
They do all say that pretty much, especially when it gets too difficult. When the case gets difficult, like,
which it clearly was. He didn't understand what was going on, or didn't want to understand what was really going on. Because that would have been, somebody mentioned lazy. Yeah, that would have involved a little bit more work, wouldn't it?
Or they throw in the high conflict. Okay.
Yeah, that's the one.
If they really don't want to get
toxic
anything
relationship, high conflict.
They're like, high conflict. That's it. We won't do any more work now. It's too high conflict, and it's never going to be resolved. And then they just say, right, we're off the case. We can't do any more here, and they vanish. They literally vanish. You try to email them, they don't reply. You try to call them, they don't answer the phone.
I'll tell you another story about my case. Is that my ex-wife refused to talk to Kafkas and refused to take my daughter to Kafkas. Basically, point blank refused. So I asked Kafkas to make an application for a Part 25 specialist to investigate what's going on, which they did, and they were given an order for Part 25. My ex-wife in court said, "I'm not going to comply, and nor will I allow my daughter to comply with this. So it's not going to happen." and basically came the date when they're supposed to go, they never turned up. I said to Kafkas, you need to go back, you need to enforce this. They pretty much shrug their shoulders and say, what can we do? It's like, you've just deemed it more appropriate for a psychologist to examine my daughter because of the nature of the case. A judge has given you that order, and now you're saying you're not going to enforce it. Not even pass them the paperwork to actually read the paperwork, and they just, what can we do? What can we do?
But that is a common answer. Unfortunately, that is a common answer as well. When they don't know what to do, they wash their hands of it.
Yeah.
They either use the high conflict thing with the judges, and they all sit there in cahoots going, it's high conflict, and they're like, oh, now we can get out of this. It's getting too complicated. We just use the high conflict word, and we can just sort of push it aside, and that's not acceptable. And then because we've talked a bit about Kafkas, but then they work in tandem with social services. I don't know if anyone here has had social services involved as well as Kafkas.
I did at the beginning, yeah.
But I have, and that experience in itself was traumatic. I don't like anything like this because, as I said, when you're in a relationship, the last thing you think when you separate from someone is that you're going to get your child embroiled in a court system of Kafkas, social services, and solicitors. That's the last thing you want your child to ever have to be in part of. But then I found when social services got involved, it seemed to escalate things. Okay, not only were they in cahoots with Kafkas, but they were all agreeing stuff with Kafkas without even letting me know. And they were talking to, they were both visiting my ex and working on things in the background and not even telling me about it. And I'm like, this is outrageous. And then the social worker said, right, I'm going to be paying your ex-partner a visit. I said, oh, great, okay. When are you going to visit me? Oh, we're not. When what? We don't need to visit you. I said, well, why not? You know, if you're going to visit my ex-partner, surely you want to visit me with my child. Well, as you don't have access to your child, we're just going to visit your ex-partner only with her new partner. And then they said, oh, well, by the way, your daughter's calling the stepdad daddy. And I'm like, okay, why are you telling me that? You know, what was the purpose of you dropping that in there? So then I asked her, are you recording our conversations? Because I found on the phone with social services as well, they were saying things which they shouldn't be saying. And it wasn't very professional what she was saying. And I asked her quite bluntly, are you recording these calls? No. I said, well, I am. Yeah. Just so you know, I am recording it. Because one, I've never experienced a situation like this before. I've never wanted to be in a situation like this. And I'm sure a lot of parents that are listening to this won't want to be in a situation like this. So I did it to cover myself. Because the things that she was saying was illegal. It was just outrageous what she was saying to me on the phone.
Well, I'll be honest with Mark. I find from the experience I've had from dealing with just speaking with other fathers and so on, and some mothers, that the outcome of the court is very much dependent on the child's age. So if the child is kind of 5 and below, you can reasonably expect a good involvement and outcome from the court process, and Kafkas will be heavily involved. Between the age of 5 and 9, I mean, they become less interested. And after 9 years of age, honestly, if anyone asked me for advice now, I would tell them not to bother, because basically the fact that you're not going to see your kids for 6 to 9 months. Alienation is going to set in. By the time you go to court, it's going to be a painful experience for everybody, including the child, to be in there. And I agree with you. Social services were just useless in my case, absolutely useless. I mean, I just left away. They're called SS for a reason. It was just awful. It was really very unpleasant. They didn't do anything. They actually made matters a lot worse, and it was a very unpleasant process.
I'm in the unusual position of having finding a parental alienation made against my ex, which is unusual, and I'm now looking. The only recourse I've got now is to look at some laws that were passed in April. I need to look into them a bit more, but about the control and the coercion and all the other things that could be applied retrospectively. But I'm not going to.
Funny enough, you say that with the coercive control and things like that. Now, funnily enough, a lot of the dads don't ever speak about that. Now, I don't know if anyone's ever spoken to you about this, Debbie, but when it comes to a man being controlled in a situation, especially when it comes to the children, men don't think about coercive control because I guess we are programmed differently, aren't we? We don't see ourselves as victims. And I think that's also a problem with men, because even when we go through things like domestic abuse or violence, we don't see ourselves as victims, so we don't report it. We don't speak to anyone. And that's a problem.
Yes, and
You won't get anywhere if you do, though. Will not get anywhere if you do that, because I wanted to report her for a sexual assault, and I went to the police, and all I got was this really aggressive sergeant shouting down the phone at me, telling me, it's basically in so many words to get lost. There's no case. And I said, but she told me if I didn't do what she wanted me to, she'd threaten I'd never see my children again. I'm now alienated. This was like a couple of years ago, and I said I've been sitting on this for a long time. I remember that night I couldn't sleep all night. She slept like a baby, and I was just worried because I thought I'm not going to see my children again, because that's what she was like. She was just horrible. And then they just dismissed me like it was. They could have just laughed at me. It was just nothing to them. And that's why people don't go to the police, because the police, if you're a man, doesn't matter. You must be guilty. And as we see all the time now, all these proponents of this anti-PA feminist sort of organisation on Twitter, they're all on there, saying all men are perpetrators. And that, I feel re-victimised reading that. It's just disgusting. The whole thing is completely rotten, and it needs looking at, and it needs to be fixed. And I don't know how we're going to do this, because as far as I can see, there's lots of money to be made out of this, and the misery factor will just be there forever for more and more people that are about to become fathers that are going to go through this, and then find that the women that are alienated from their children are thrown under the bus as well, because they don't allow parental alienation to become illegal, because even though it affects the alienated mothers, forget about them,
and an
because it
awful
helps
lot of
fathers
that
too.
is to
They don't
do
want that.
with the
That's what
money
it's about.
that organisations such as Refuge and Women's Aid actually get given by the government.
Yep.
It's very, very political. It's and an awful lot of men in government are hounded and belittled by a great deal of the women who are fueling that behaviour. And I've seen that time and time again, and I hear it time and time again, talking to fathers such as yourself, who are terrified of speaking up, because they've spent their whole lives being told to be strong for their mothers and to be strong for the other people in their lives. They've been told not to have emotion. You're not allowed to cry. You're not allowed to show your emotion. You've been, you hear it constantly. And because that is so ingrained in your psyche, you just don't speak up when you need to, because there is that fear sitting in your subconscious that if you speak up, you're going to be wrong. So it belittles you and it makes you quiet. And that
100%.
also relates back to losses way back in your childhood to do with the relationship you had with your parents and any other influential adult in your life. Could even have been the school teacher at your primary school.
It's interesting you say that, because I believe a lot of this is transgenerational.
Hugely.
If I look back,
Hugely.
if I look at my ex-wife, for instance, her mother did exactly the same. She had 2 husbands, I think, and 3 children, 2 husbands, and exactly the same thing was done to both the fathers in their lives.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, you see it happening again and again. But so what that means is that we are breeding a generation of people who are going to do this again and again and again. And it's the trauma that we're inflicting on children as a result of the process of the family core is just tremendous. Absolutely tremendous.
And it's going to carry on, because they are being shown an example of how to be with the person in their life that is supposed to be the person who they love, who they care about, who they've created children with. But they're not going to know what that is, because that's not the example they're being given. They're being given an example that person makes the children, and that person's then excluded at whatever cost from that child's life.
Well said.
And the possibility
Absolutely.
is that the children will turn on their own parent, given their turn. That's a fear I have for my own grandchildren, doing to my daughter what she's done to me. And I've been summarily punished for moving and leaving an alcoholic man who was destroying me, to the point that I could not function as a parent, that I had spent all of her 14 years trying so hard to keep her safe from all of his behaviours. And she has no idea, not at all, of the things I went through and I heard, I experienced, and the way I was treated, not just by him, but by other adults who thought they could involve themselves in our marriage.
Yeah.
And when it came to the breakdown of our marriage, I had no idea that there was a war party lynch mob lifted up and ready against me, because it wasn't just my divorce with my ex-husband. It was my divorce with my ex-sister-in-law and somebody who had supposed to have been my friend and various other hangers-on that, and he created this posse of women around him that all raised their voice against me. And yet not once in all the many, many years of relationship that I had with any one of those women had they ever said those things to my face, ever given me any indication that I was going to experience that from them through my divorce. And they all had an influence in the language that was being used around my child, who I couldn't protect because I was separated from her.
The thing is, Debbie, right, what I think they're lacking in investigating properly is the prevalence of personality disorders. There's so many of these people with personality disorders, and they are highly persuasive, and they can play the victim like Oscar-style
Exactly.
performance. Everybody falls for it.
And that's exactly
And
what my
your
ex-husband
parents
did. He
did
played the
something like
victim.
that.
He did it when we went to mediation. He berated me in the car for an hour with a can of drink in his hand and yelled and screamed at me in the car for an hour until we got to the mediation appointment. So at that mediation appointment, I was extremely distressed and upset. And I was just beside myself. So when I tried to explain that to the person who was supposed to be impartial, I was told I had an anger problem because he sat there with his arms crossed and his legs outstretched and said, "I haven't got a problem with Debbie." Well, it's no wonder, because he was bullying me all the way there and all the way back, every single week. And this is what happens when you are in that place where you cannot speak up because you are not being heard. And eventually you just stop speaking up because you know that every time you do, it's going to be used as a blunt instrument against you.
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And don't forget as well, it's our children that don't want to see us, so consequently we must be the bad
Yes.
parents.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And even in society, they look at it that way. It's less of an issue for fathers, I would imagine, but for mothers who are alienated, society is not ready for that breakdown in that relationship to understand actually it's because of a reason. There is something going on there, and it's very difficult. I think particularly difficult for women. It's very difficult for men. And I'm alienated to my daughter now. There's not a moment in my day when my daughter is not in my head.
Yes.
I'm wondering what she's doing now, how's she getting on at school, this, that, and the other, and it's constantly going on. So it's there's so much that needs to be resolved, not just in the legal system, but in a societal system as well. So I do fear. And I actually said to the judge in the, the district judge ended up giving me an indirect contact order, and I said that's effectively a no contact order. And what you're doing is you're putting me back in this court in 21 years trying to get contact with my grandchildren, because that's what's going to happen as we go through here. And if I can, I just want to share, because I did appeal the decision. I want to share something that the judge wrote in the judgment. He said, "I share the judge's concern for my daughter's name, emotional development, the loss of a relationship with a father who, by all the evidence shows, she loves and whose company she enjoyed, is a loss that will cost her dear in the short, medium and long term. That is unreconcilable with the child welfare checklist, and yet that's the situation we're in. So you throw your life to a judge expecting them to make the right decision, as you say, for the welfare of the child, and they effectively say, no, had enough, on you go, not interested anymore.
But logically, if they say that, the most logical step you would take then is to remove the child from the
Absolutely.
abuse and send them to the person where they're safe. But you read so
Absolutely.
much
The,
where
the
they
thing
just
is,
don't
when
do
it comes
that.
to
And I don't know
removing
why.
children, that's a bit of a taboo subject, unfortunately, because there's a lot of outside influence, unfortunately, on the court system, especially when it comes to mothers that are in the court system. And if a child is even thought about being removed from that mother, it has a massive ripple effect within the court system, and that's why they tend to don't do it at all. And when they do it, they have to make it out to be like it's an extreme case, where it should be what's best for the child, what's best for the child's development, mental health, everything that comes with it. It should be seen as that, as opposed to an extreme case of this is the only time we can remove that child. Now, removing a child is not an easy thing anyway, because it's quite a serious thing to do. But if there's evidence that child, something's going on for that child to be removed, then that needs to be looked at.
But Mark, remove the child from what? What should be happening is that a child moves freely between the mother and the father if they're post-separation, and so there's no need for it to be removed. What you're removing the child from is an emotionally abusive environment to one which arguably is going to be safe or safer. So I understand what you're saying, and I do understand that there's a whole catalogue against it.
That's the issue. Yeah, but I agree. Anyone with a bit of common sense would do that, but they very rarely do it. They very rarely
I agree.
do it. And I've seen horrendous cases where they said in their reports and judgments that this child is going to be severely damaged in the future because of the harm that is happening from the resident parent. But yet they still left the child there.
Do nothing about it. I mean, part of their concern is they're worried the child's going to run away, run back to where they've been taken from. Now that clearly shows you that there's something wrong there. If a child's going to run away from a safe, loving environment, a safe, loving parent, back to an abusive environment, they've got to step in and resolve this.
There's a couple of things that I want to obviously address. One's generational trauma. Generational trauma is a massive issue when it comes to going to court and all the things that we've experienced. A lot of this stuff is generational, unfortunately. And again, someone mentioned earlier about personality disorders. Now, no one in unfortunately, no one in the court system seems to care that someone, doesn't matter if it's the mum or dad, someone may be suffering from some form of mental health issue. Okay. Mm-hmm. And they might need a diagnosis for that in order to make the process of the court smoother. Okay, so that means someone of a medical professional may need to come in and interview the parents and get to the bottom of what the real issue is here, as opposed to just saying everything's high conflict. Okay, generational trauma is a massive issue in what we deal with.
Can I just interject? Sorry. I had a psychologist who saw my ex-wife and myself. She found no issues with me whatsoever. With her, interestingly, they found hyperanxiety, a helplessness strategy, and it was the third one. I can't remember the third one was, but control issues. Right, those three factors they found. And to my mind, if you've discovered those three things, that is indicative of an underlying personality disorder. So why aren't they professionally kind of triggered to think, well, let's look into this further and find out what's driving this behaviour? They don't. They just stop. And that's it.
I completely agree. In my first set of proceedings, there was a psychological report on my ex-wife that found that she transfers her anxieties into the child. And then my answer to that was, and what are you going to do about it?
Exactly. And this is the problem. No one does anything. Everything just goes stagnant. Everything they just rush in to get the final hearing out the way, and they can wipe their hands of the court.
No, you're right.
Move on to the next case.
It's funny because when it came up in court, you could actually hear everyone go, and that was it.
Exactly. Because they know in the end what's going to happen is they're going to finish the final hearing. You're going to still have no contact, and what are you going to do? go back to court.
Come back again.
You're gonna go back again and start the whole process over again, and that's how they catch you. It's like a cog wheel. You need the cogs to keep the wheel moving, okay? And the only way you can keep that cog moving is if they try and finish that final hearing as quick as possible with nothing really resolved.
Yeah.
They tell you that they've resolved it and they've put court orders in place, but the resident parent won't abide by it. So they know you're going to have to come back again and start the process again. So talking about process, actually, legal aid. They stopped legal aid. Okay, they stopped legal aid, and there's a loophole. Who knows what a loophole is to legal aid now?
Domestic abuse.
Now, are we going to address this?
I've done it. I got legal aid using that very thing because I'd been seeing my GP several times because I was trying to work in a hospital and this was affecting my work. He signed me off. He said he didn't want me being there giving intravenous medications and controlled drugs whilst I'm, not got my eye on the ball. And I did suffer a lot from her behaviour. So I went to see my GP and he wrote a letter for me to give to legal aid. I actually got legal aid, which is unusual for a man to get. I did get legal aid, but on the other side of that coin, I would say that legal aid itself is pretty useless because they're given a sort of minimum wage, if you like, these solicitors, and they haven't got their heart in it. They just go through emotions.
I'm for one surprised that you got legal aid in the first place. So did you get that based on medical records or something? Okay, so that is, I've never heard that before, because normally with legal aid you have to state that there's some form of domestic violence or abuse that is occurred within that relationship in order for them to grant you, and you also have to go to a specific charity, which I'm not going to mention, who will do the application and everything for you to get you that legal aid. Okay, so that's something new. I've never heard that before. So not like legal aid would have helped me anyway, because again, like anything in life, they get a small budget to do the legal aid work and they literally do no work. So what can I say?
Well, the problem with legal aid, and this goes back to when I worked in the solicitor's office, every single memo, telephone call, note is charged. And that's why they can't do the work, because they can't actually get paid for it. So they don't do it. And so all the essential bits, all the small snippets of really important information never get recorded because they're not going to get paid for it. So why do it in the first place? And I mean, literally everything, every time they do a voice recording, every time they do a telephone message, every time they have an email, every single item is charged. And that's why they don't.
Yeah. I saw a program once called Minder, and George Cole said, I saw my brief in High Street the other day. I said hello and he sent me a bill for a £5. That's a joke,
exactly.
but that is how it is. That is literally how it is. And everything, unless you've got the money, you're going to get nowhere. So I sacked that person off and I just self-litigated after that.
Well, I want to touch upon, guys and ladies, I want to touch upon solutions. Okay, solutions for all of this, because I don't want people thinking that we've come on here and all we're doing is complaining about these services. These are our own personal experiences. We're not saying that everyone's going to experience what we've experienced. Unfortunately, this is a pattern, and a lot of people that I know and worked with have gone through the same sort of process, unfortunately. But what I want to talk about is solutions. Okay, now the government, I don't know how many people know about this, but the government has proposed a new families hub. Now what they want to do with these family hubs is to locate them around the UK, and these family hubs are supposed to be a one-stop shop, okay, to help families. The issue I have with the family hubs is they're giving the money to local authorities. So what does everyone think about that? The money is not independent. It's not going to independent organisations to run these family hubs. It's actually going to local authorities. The local authorities have to apply for the funding to open up these family hubs.
I think if you look at where local authorities spend their money for domestic violence, you'll see where that money goes.
Well, that will go back.
Do we think this is a good idea?
Not at all.
Yeah, they'll go back.
Well, I think the family hub is a good idea.
No.
The way it's being funded is not a good idea. I mean, I do think we need a citizens advice bureau type organisation to help families who are approaching the separation. You know, because a man or a woman will ask their friends, "Oh, I want to leave my wife, I want to leave my husband," and they'll say, "Oh, get a good lawyer, get the house, get the kids," and that's the worst possible advice you can give to anybody. So it's an independent citizens advice bureau like organisation. I think is a good idea. The way they're trying to fund it is it's not going to work. It's a disaster.
Well, this is what I'm saying. This is why I'm worried about this, because they've put aside quite a large budget for this. Okay, and let's be honest, local authorities are struggling. Okay, they're struggling. So they've got a big fat pot of cash there to open these family hubs. I can't see it working personally. Their social services are stretched as it is. So you're going to now try and get the local authority to put money and time into these family hubs, which, to be honest, they don't really care about. Let's be honest. These local authorities don't care about it, because it's what I think would have been better, and this is just my own personal view, is there's independent charities and non-profits out there that know about these cases that we're talking about, that can use that money more efficiently to support the families long term to actually get the results that's needed. Now, let's be honest, if you've got a local authority now taking a large budget to open up a family hub, they're going to be running on statistics. Like most government organisations, it's all about statistics. So it's going to be one of those in and out type scenarios. Let's get the families in as quick as possible, and let's get them out as quick as possible, because we can't waste the money actually really helping them. We just need to make it look like we're helping them. And I don't think that's going to work. We've got too many people out there doing that already. So surely we need a different solution.
I'd absolutely agree.
The problem you've always got, though, is the false allegations side of things, which does slow things up horrendously. And I think they should deal with false allegations as soon as possible as a priority, because that is what causes the alienation in the long term, because it gives them the space to control your child psychologically and put all these things into their head which aren't true, and then it's just destroyed. Your relationship gets destroyed. So if they started with the false allegations, deal with them at a criminal court level as well, not just a probability sort of aspect, then I think things could move a lot quicker, and you can find out who really is the problem in that relationship and why the children are best served.
Can I interject on that? Because I really do agree with you for an awful lot of those things. But in my own experience, I was literally drummed out of my daughter's life within 24 hours of saying I wanted a divorce. And it wasn't until just a few short years ago that I really understood the levels of grief involved, not just at what happened and how it happened, but also how the levels of grief from my childhood and my ex-husband's childhood had an impact on the behaviours of the time and the way we responded and didn't reason with each other. And this actually is one of the biggest things. If we went through a process as adults of dealing with the problems that we've actually been living with, and being really vocally honest about the things that we've been coping with that have been difficult, and where the relationship has broken down, where we've stopped relating to each other and talking to each other, if we actually looked at those things in depth and put our honest voices to those things, and the other side knew something of those honest voices, there'd be an awful lot of realizations and ahas that actually there's been a massive amount of mixed messaging going on where nobody's hearing the opposite side.
Yeah, everything needs to be investigated. This family hub sounds a good idea. I think I agree with you, Mark. It won't work, but we do need early intervention and properly investigating what's going on. Is there alienation? Is there abuse? We spoke about courts and Kafkas earlier. That's too late. When you get to that stage, it's too late. Damage has been done. The children have been emotionally and psychologically damaged already. It's too late. It needs early intervention.
But you know there is a model that actually is in the UK courts at the moment. I think it's called the family drug and alcohol courts. Whereas if a parent, normally it's a single parent, is addicted to drugs or alcohol, and they're at the point where their children might be taken away, that they can opt to go to this family drug and alcohol courts. It's FDAC, is fdadc.org.uk. It's not related to the Ministry of Justice. It's run by the people at Centre for Justice Innovation. But basically, if their child is about to go into care, they can opt to go to this alternative family court, where the whole system revolves around repairing that relationship, getting that parent off of their addiction, and making sure they maintain that relationship with the child the whole time. So it's something like that needs to be put into place.
Yeah.
So and it's done there to support the relationship. It's not there to break the relationship down, to sever the relationship. It's there to support it. I think going back, I think it was Matt mentioned about the false allegations. There was absolutely no reason 6 months into a trial hearing or a court process, all of a sudden a false allegation can be raised up, never be reported to the police. All of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm worried he might sexually abuse the son or the daughter or something like that, or she might sexually abuse. I mean, that just is evidence that the person is doing it maliciously. And they do, I agree with you, and everyone I speak to, it's the false allegations in the process which is causing the delay and causing the most amount of expense. So when people talk about what they should be doing in the court, deal with false allegations straight away. That's the most important thing.
And also,
I agree as well. I think
absolutely
the problem that we have is there's no early intervention. No one has come to the conclusion that early intervention is the best way. Okay. Now, for me, that's something I want my organisation to do, is to interject straight away early intervention, because that is the key to success when it comes to families. Okay. Without it, it gets dragged on for years and years and years, and damage just continues. Okay. False allegations and domestic abuse or violence, anything of that nature, okay, should be transferred to criminal court. Okay. And what I mean by that is it allows then the police to do a proper investigation instead of allowing people to turn up to family court and if it isn't going their way, they just throw in these allegations just willy-nilly. Oh, look, the dad might be getting more access, or the mum might be getting more access. Let me just throw in a little nugget. Oh, by the way, did you know that they abused? Well, hold on, where did that come from?
Yeah.
That's unacceptable. The judge should then go, hold on, that's quite a serious allegation you're making there. What we're going to have to do now is get the police involved and let them investigate. And if need be, they can transfer that part to criminal court, because that's where it should be tested.
Yes,
it should be tested to a criminal standard.
Absolutely. And do you notice the pattern with legal aid, that when people are nearly on their first year, nearly on their second year, nearly on their third year, right up to 5 years, that's when the false allegations come up?
Yeah.
Because as soon as that false allegation is made, they automatically click into the next year of legal aid.
Yeah.
Makes it very easy to keep the process in court, keep the process unresolved, and keep creating nonsense.
100%.
Yeah, I know whether it goes to criminal court or not. I mean, funnily enough, actually, I mentioned this to somebody the other day, and they said to me, if you think family courts are in a bad way, you should look at the criminal courts. So I think the delay, if you kick it to criminal court, the delay might even be more. What I would like to see is sanctions being made against those who make false allegations.
Yes.
Because I believe if you start sanctioning those who make false allegations, very soon they won't be encouraged. They won't be, and I believe my ex-wife particularly was encouraged to make false allegations. She certainly wasn't sat down and say, "Are you sure? Are you sure this is happening?" by her lawyers. I think she was encouraged to make false allegations, and she knew, and she knew that if she made it, delay. So I think sanctions against those who make false allegations is far more important than I think they're kicking it up to criminal courts. Although I do believe it needs to be beyond reasonable doubt, not balance of probability.
Well, this is the thing, because this is what people don't understand. If it gets moved to criminal court and false allegations have been made, then they can be prosecuted for it. The problem that we have is because it's not tested to criminal standard. So when it comes to family court, it's just accepted as fact. That's not good enough. If it goes to criminal court, it will quash all false allegations. It will stop it immediately, because the person, once it's fully investigated and the court says, well, hold on, that's false. You've made a false. Right, that's it. Now we can prosecute you for that false allegation. In family court, you don't get that. You will never get that in family court, unfortunately.
I thought
they just take it as fact. That's it.
Yeah, I'm not legally trained, but I thought it was still perjury in the family courts if they made a false allegation, and it's just that nobody ever gets prosecuted for perjury.
They don't action it. They don't action it, but
they can action it
in criminal.
They can
That's what I'm saying. They can action it as perjury in criminal court, and then they can get a conviction out of it. Yeah,
I know. It's a sanction that's required. I'm sure of it. So it's a. But like I say, but going back to your idea about early intervention, the problem I have with that is that, I agree with you, early intervention is required, but if you ask 100 people, you get 1,000 different definitions of early intervention. I think it's just got to be seen as a national health crisis, that we are literally poisoning our next generation of our children and the children beyond that, and that we've got to get this out from the adversarial system that we have at the moment.
And not just that, these children lose half of who they are, not just with losing their parent, they lose their grandparents, their aunts, their uncles, their cousins. They are their first friends in life. They are their alternative adults who they can go to when they have a problem, and they're not there. They are wiped out of their lives as if they were completely insignificant, but the children have no voice in that loss. There are 1.4 million grandparents detached from about 2 million children. That's a massive figure. And when I worked it out, when I set up Berkshire Grandparents, I sat down and I worked out just how many people become detached from a child when they lose a connection with a parent. And I worked it out to approximately 13 valuable family connections. Now, consider a family where that's 2 children, 3 children, and that's a massive amount of people to lose from your life, not have a voice, not understand why, and none of these children do. So it isn't just the alienation from the parent, it's the alienation from their wider family who give them so much balance in their lives.
And also, can I just say, with reference to those recent killings of Arthur and Star, the grandparents in both of those cases, I believe these both cases were alienated.
Yes.
Any wider members of the family were pushed away. So the abuse could go on unchecked. And also, I think, they make allegations about us in family court. We're the parents. Okay, we have to go through that mill with that, and you have to prove you're innocent. It's ridiculous. And then you get these people that can go and find a boyfriend or a girlfriend, move them in. No one knows anything about them. They start controlling everything. They cut everybody else off, and then the child gets murdered. Why aren't they doing DBS checks on people that move into your child's house behind closed doors? No one knows anything about this person.
Well, this is the thing.
They've got to do something.
There's no real due process, is there, for situations like this, and this is why it's good to talk about these things. It's good to have a discussion about it, so we can hopefully pick up people's ideas and feedback as to what experiences they've had and what they think that might work. Now we've got Dominic Raab says that he wants to invite a drastic and bold idea to keep family matters out of court. Now, I know when MPs say things like this, it's all for effect. There's no real meat to it. There's no real substance to what they're saying, because they don't really care. Let's be honest, they don't actually care. What they're trying to do is just say, well, I've had an email or I've had a letter sent to me with regards to a parent struggling in court, so I have to make it look like I'm doing something. If Dominic Raab came and sat on this podcast, what would you say to him? What could keep family matters out of court in your eyes?
Well, people doing their jobs, right? if Kafkas did their job and the court and the judges did their job, I think it'd be over a lot quicker. So I mean,
and there's a huge lack of education for judges. Sir Paul Coleridge left the judiciary because he didn't like what was happening in family court, and every time he raised his voice to say it should not be like this, he was beaten down. And so all the other judges that want to make change just don't raise their voices. And he actually stood on a podium at a parental alienation conference in 2018 that I attended, and he said the judges are not educated enough. They need to have better education in family breakdown. Most of them haven't got a clue. They're scrabbling in the dark. And people like Dominic Raab actually ought to be supporting those systems to be working properly.
My fear, sorry, Debbie. My fear with that is, regardless of how much education we give the judges, I don't feel that court is the right place in general anyway.
Oh no, completely agree with you.
I don't see, even, it doesn't matter how much, because remember, judges are busy people. They've got a lot to take in, and they've got some serious judgments to make based on people's children and family and everything like that. So we can educate them as much as we want, but unfortunately there's only so much they can physically do, because at the end of the day they've got to write a court order. Okay, yep. That's what they're there for, is just to put orders in place and try and keep some kind of structure to the process. But I don't think we should be even be going to court. We should be looking to keep this out of court, full stop, so they don't even need to be educated, because it's the court process that makes this worse.
I completely agree.
It exasperates the whole situation, and then unfortunately you do get the unfortunate situations that people take their own lives because of the process. And what these people really need is support. Someone literally holding their hand through the whole process on both sides, because it's about getting the communication from both parents. Yes. They don't have to talk to each other, but someone needs to be in the middle. Someone needs to be able to do the communication between the parents and hopefully get some kind of resolve from them. As soon as you go to court, like someone said earlier, it's like you're going into a boxing match.
Yes.
Everyone's tense, everyone's anxious, everyone's, angry, emotions are flying, and then as soon as you get in there, it's like ding ding, round one, and it starts. It is straight away, and the only way we're going to solve this is if we remove that. Completely
agree.
I do agree with you, but we have to go back to why are we in this situation in the first place, and it goes back to what we spoke about right at the very beginning. Everybody's experienced a huge amount of grief in this whole process.
Correct.
So if I wanted to stop my partner from seeing their kids, I know if I go to court, Kafkas themselves say now it takes about 53 weeks to resolve on average a case. So I know there's a period of time where that person, my partner, will not see my children or not see our children. So, and I want to punish that person because the divorce settlement has not been as good as I expected. I've had to sell the house now, moved out my 4-bedroom house into a 2-bedroom flat, and I want to punish that person. And we've got to make it understand, whether you're a father or a mother, punishing that person is not punishing that person at all. You're actually punishing the children.
Exactly.
And that's a societal issue. That's not so much a legal issue or anything like that. And until we start to understand that children are not hammers to beat the other parent with, it's going to be very difficult to change all those things. I'm at a loss to understand how we're going to do that. When we find ourselves in that process, the system should be designed to support contact, support arrangements, support the family, not not to be a referee in the boxing match, if we can continue that analogy. So at the moment, Kafkas, I find you have Kafkas pretending to be judges and judges pretending to be Kafkas. You know, absolutely, yeah.
Open court and transparency, that's what we need. If people were held more accountable for their actions, maybe that would change people's views on what they're doing.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
at the moment, everyone can hide behind the family court system and no one's held accountable.
I'm certain that my ex-wife and I have a very different story about what happened in court.
Yeah, but I think it's not only you, boys. It's probably all exes will say, "Well, I'm the victim."
Sure
you know, it was all them. Because as soon as you take someone to court, it's almost like that's it. They're the problem. The court sees you the problem because you want to go to court to see your children, instead of going, "Well, why is he coming here?" Or why is he or she coming to court in the first place? You know, if they were together for so long. Oh, by the way, was there any abuse when you were living together? No. Was there any domestic violence when you were together? No. Okay, so now we're in court. You're saying all these things that are happening now? Yes. Surely the judge would be like, "Come on, seriously? Are we really doing this now?" He should be going, "Right, what I'm gonna do is we'll do a fact finding, okay? But what we're gonna do, you still see the children. We're not gonna stop you from seeing the children because there's actually no risks. There's no risks here. So actually, we're just going to continue the relationship between both parents, and we'll do a fact finding, and then we can make a resolve from that." Okay? But they don't do that. They stop contact. They drag on the process for years to come. We need a solution. We need a solution. And as soon as you go to court, it gets dragged on and on and on. We need to nip it in the bud from the start. We need to remove that adversarial contact, that aggression, that emotion. We need to take it away and say, right, let's do it this way. Let's change it up.
We need something different because what's happening now ain't working.
It ain't. It's not working.
I don't think
The problem is, I think, with social services, they take sides straight away and they stick to that side. And also, in their mind, I think that saying possession is 9/10 of the law applies to them as well. So if the kids are staying with one of the parents, they've been there all the time, they just loathe to see it any other way. So
I honestly believe that we are in this system because the system is so beneficial to one parent that they can use the children to punish the other one. If the system of the courts at the moment was seen to be unbiased and actually truly for the benefit of the children, I don't think that many cases would end up in court anyway. They'd be resolved through family, they'd be resolved through the local pastor or priest or whatever, and they'd find alternative solutions to mediate the process. It's because the system is so beneficial to the aggressive parent that actually so many cases are now going up there. Because like I said, the advice is get a good lawyer, get the house, get the kids.
That is very true, Paul,
because
the most recent case, I just want to talk about this briefly. The most recent case was the lady that moved from Dubai to the UK.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
She, you know, if she stayed in Dubai, let's be realistic, she probably wouldn't have got anything. Okay? But the fact that she had to move from Dubai back to the UK and then file for divorce, that's why she got such a huge settlement, over 500 million. Now, let's be realistic, yeah? That wouldn't have happened in Dubai. That just wouldn't have happened. So why, this is the thing, why do people feel that coming to the UK, getting married here and divorcing here is the way forward? What is the UK portraying for people to think this is the place to be divorced?
I mean, they say London's divorce capital of the world.
But it's the truth, isn't it? What is being put out there for people to think that this is, and you're right, it is societal, and we need to stop that. We need to stop that whole issue of, oh, if you're in the UK and you get divorced, you'll get loads of money,
What?
and that's where it all starts.
Loads
It
of
is
money.
though, isn't it?
Or you're
crazy.
completely white.
It doesn't matter if you're a man or woman. It doesn't matter
No.
because it doesn't. You know, if you're the one who, unfortunately, is the one that is instigating the divorce or the separation, You seem to be the one that loses out.
I lost out completely. I had absolutely nothing. And the little bit of legal aid that I got was paid for with the little bit of money that I got out of my divorce. So I didn't see a penny.
And that's the problem. Always one side loses out completely, whether it be the children, whether it be financially, emotionally. There's always one side that gets drained.
Completely.
Always.
Well, the biggest thing they should look overall is the children's mental health, and children's mental health presently all over the place is worse than it's ever been. And we've got all the information. We understand why this happens. We understand what the processes are, and so on. But still nothing changes. You think, well, they've got all this information. Surely they want to make sure children have every chance afforded to them growing up, but they just take it away from them. And they're quite happy with that. And I really don't understand why that should be their priority.
And this is why children have not just emotional, mental health issues. They also have eating disorders and behaviour disorders. And, all of the normal mores of society just go out the window because they do not grow up knowing how to behave around other people. Or they end up so silent because they're terrified of being who they ought to be around other people because they do not know how to interact.
It's because they know the secret.
Have any of you ever met a person that is from an alienated background?
Yes,
I've met a couple.
I have.
By accident. And they both told the same things. And this girl that I spoke to, she said she moved to her dad when she was 11, and she was frightened because her mother was she had loads of problems, and they moved her to her father. And she said after that, I realised what it's like to live in a normal family, and that's what they should be looking at for kids, but they don't want to do that. I don't know why. It's just.
I mean, part of the challenge is on the legislation. We don't have a presumption of shared care whatsoever. So, I mean, if you look at the current system as it was, if we had a presumption of, let's say, 50-50 contact, where it was safe and appropriate. I mean, if I worked on a North Sea oil rig, I wouldn't expect to see my kids 50% of the time. And if I was a safe father and so on. So, if you were entering this process with the assumption that there's a 50-50 outcome, and it's got to be exceptional as to why that doesn't happen, I think a lot of these cases would just go away, because it's the amount of contact is then linked to the amount of child maintenance you have to pay and all this type of stuff. And it's just the whole system is designed around. It's like a bunch of adults have sat in a room, designed something which is based around the tax system rather than, as you said, the welfare of the child going through.
Yes, absolutely.
100%.
Agree.
100%. That's all we have time for this episode. I would like to thank all my special guests, Steve, Debi, Matt and Paul, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join me on this particular episode. On the next episode of Truth Hurts, we will be speaking to victims of the family court process and its associated services. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
I'm Trisha Tharby. I'm from the UK, and I listen to Truth Hurts podcast.
Hi, I'm Steve from England, and I'm listening to the Truth Hurts podcast.
I'm Christina from the UK, and I'm listening to the Truth Hurts podcast.
Hi, my name is Mark Hegarty, and I'm from Wales in the UK, and I am listening to the Truth Hurts podcast.
I'm Jay Dean from the Netherlands, and I'm listening to Truth Hurts podcast.
Hey, what's good, people? It's Missy here. Guess what? I'm listening to Truth Hurts podcast.
You're listening to Truth Hurts podcast, presented by myself, Mark Sheppard, and special guests. Hello and welcome to our very first Truth Hurts podcast. My name is Mark Sheppard, your host, and this episode is going to be in 2 parts based on family law. Today we are joined by Steve, the author of blog Dad's Still Fighting for You, Emily, and the organizer of Ambling Against Alienation. We're also joined by Debi, the emotional resilience coach.